never forget the look on their faces when they told me to leave. My own home. The house I'd lived in for 12 years. The place where I'd planted the garden out back. Where I'd repainted the kitchen 3 times because I could never get the shade of cream just right. Where I'd celebrated birthdays and grieved losses and built what I thought was an unshakable life. Pack your things, Sarah, my sister-in-law Monica said, her arms crossed, her expression cold as winter steel. You have until the end of the week. Behind her stood my brother-in-law Richard, my husband's business partner David, and even my own cousin Jessica. People I'd welcomed into my life. People I trusted. They formed a wall between me and the staircase leading to the bedrooms upstairs. My bedroom. Or at least, it had been. 3 months earlier, my husband Thomas died in a car accident. One moment he was driving home from a business dinner. The next moment I was identifying his body at the county morgue. The grief was a living thing that hollowed me out from the inside. I stopped eating properly. I stopped sleeping through the night. I moved through the world like a ghost haunting her own life. And these people, these so-called family members, they'd been so supportive at first. Monica brought casseroles. Richard handled the funeral arrangements. David took care of Thomas's business affairs. Jessica stayed over some nights when the loneliness became unbearable. I thought they were helping me survive. I didn't realize they were circling. I don't understand. I said that day, my voice barely above a whisper. This is my home. Monica's laugh was sharp and cruel. Your home, Sarah, please. Thomas bought this house before you even met him, and according to his will, everything goes to the family trust. We've consulted with lawyers. You have no legal claim here. The room started spinning. That's not possible. Thomas and I were married for 12 years. We built this life together. You mean you spent his money while he worked himself to death? Richard said, his voice dripping with disgust. We all saw it, Sarah. The shopping trips, the redecorating, the expensive hobbies. You were a drain on him. I felt like I'd been slapped. How dare you? I worked too. I had my own career before you convinced him you needed to stay home, Jessica interrupted. And the betrayal of hearing these words from my own cousin made my knees weak. We're not stupid, Sarah. We know exactly what you were. A gold digger, Monica finished, seeming to savor the words. But the gold has run out, and we're not going to let you bleed this family dry anymore. Thomas might have been too blind to see what you really were, but we're not. I stood there in the foyer of my own home, surrounded by people I'd considered family, and I realized something that would change everything. They'd planned this. The coordinated timing, the unified front, the pre-prepared legal arguments. This wasn't a spontaneous confrontation. This was a calculated move. And they'd made one critical mistake. They assumed I was weak. I had spent 12 years married to Thomas. And yes, I left my career in finance to support his dreams of building his own company. I had been the one managing the household finances, the investments, the tax documents. I had been the one sitting beside him during late-night business planning sessions, offering advice he often took. I had been his partner in every sense of the word. But I'd also been careful, because my own mother had lost everything when my father left her with nothing but debt and broken promises. She taught me before she died that a woman should always know where she stands financially, should always have her own security, should always be prepared. So I'd watched. I'd learned. I documented. And now, standing in my foyer being told to leave my own home, I made a decision. I would let them think they'd won. Fine, I said quietly, letting my shoulders slump in defeat. I'll pack my things. The relief on their faces was almost comical. They'd expected a fight, prepared for tears and arguments. My surrender caught them off guard. We're glad you're being reasonable, Monica said, her tone softening slightly. We'll give you a week to find somewhere to go. After that, we'll need to change the locks. I nodded, turned, and walked upstairs to begin packing. Behind me, I heard them celebrating with champagne in the living room. My living room. Thomas's favorite room, where we'd spent countless evenings by the fireplace, planning our future. A future they thought they could steal in my bedroom. I pulled out my suitcases and began the careful work of packing only what I needed immediately. Clothes, toiletries, a few photographs. But I also grabbed something else. A small fireproof safe from the back of my closet. Inside were copies of documents I'd been collecting for years. Not because I'd ever expected to need them against family, but because I'd learned from my mother's mistakes to always protect myself. That night, I stayed in a hotel, a nice one, because even in my grief and shock, I refused to let them see me broken. I ordered room service, took a long bath, and then I opened my laptop. It was time to learn the truth about what I actually owned. Thomas and I had always kept separate attorneys for our personal legal matters. Even though we shared everything in our marriage, it was just a practical decision, one his lawyer had recommended when we'd gotten married. In case there's ever a conflict of interest, the lawyer had said at the time. I had thought it was overly cautious. Now I realized it was a gift. I called my attorney, Margaret Chen, first thing the next morning. Margaret had handled my personal legal matters for years, including the prenuptial agreement I'd signed before marrying Thomas, a prenup that his family had insisted on. Ironically, Sarah, Margaret said when she answered, her voice full of sympathy. I'm so sorry about Thomas. How are you holding up? Not well, I admitted, and it's gotten worse. Margaret, I need to know exactly where I stand legally. Thomas's family claims I have no right to the house, that everything goes to a family trust. Is that true? There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Sarah, who told you that? His sister Monica. She had his brother-in-law and business partner there too. They said they'd consulted lawyers. Another pause, longer this time. Sarah, I need you to come to my office today. Can you do that? Something in her tone made my heart race. Yes, when? Now, if possible. 2 hours later, I sat in Margaret's office. A wall of windows behind her overlooking the city where I'd built my life with Thomas. She had documents spread across her desk, and her expression was carefully neutral in that way lawyers have when they're about to deliver news. That will change everything. I'm going to be direct with you, Margaret said, because you deserve to know the truth, and because we have work to do. Monica lied to you, or more likely, she lied to herself and found a lawyer willing to take her money while knowing the case was hopeless. I leaned forward. What do you mean? Thomas changed his will 6 months before he died. He came to me because he wanted to make absolutely certain that everything was ironclad. He was quite specific about his wishes. Margaret turned her computer screen toward me. There, in Thomas's familiar handwriting on a scanned document, were words that made my eyes blur with tears. To my beloved wife Sarah, who has been my partner, my support, and my greatest blessing. I leave everything I own, without reservation or restriction. The house, the business, all accounts and investments. She has earned not just my love, but my trust. And I trust her to carry forward the life we built together. But, I said, my voice shaking, Monica said there was a family trust. There was, Margaret confirmed. Thomas's father set it up decades ago. But Thomas had been working to restructure everything before his death. He'd been removing assets from the trust and placing them in joint ownership with you. Or in your name entirely. The house. Joint ownership as of 8 months ago. The business, you own 51%. Thomas made sure you had controlling interest. The room seemed to tilt. I don't understand. Why didn't he tell me? According to his notes, he wanted to surprise you. He'd been planning it as an anniversary gift. He wanted to present you with documents showing that everything you'd built together was legally yours. That you'd never have to worry about being left with nothing like your mother was. The tears came then, hot and unstoppable. Thomas had known my deepest fear and had worked in secret to protect me from it. Even in death, he was taking care of me. But that meant Monica and the others had known too, or at least suspected. How could they think they could get away with this? I asked. Margaret's expression hardened. Because they assumed you didn't know about the changes. They assumed you were so grief-stricken you wouldn't think to check. And they were counting on you being too intimidated to fight back. They called me a gold digger. Of course they did. It's a classic tactic. Discredit you. Make you doubt yourself. Make you feel like you don't deserve what's legally yours. Sarah, I need to ask you something important. What do you want to do? I thought about Monica's cold eyes, Richard's disgusted tone, David's silence that spoke volumes, Jessica's betrayal. I thought about them drinking champagne in my living room, celebrating what they thought was their victory. I want them to understand exactly what they've done, I said. I want the truth. Margaret smiled, and it wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of a warrior preparing for battle. Then let's get to work. The first thing Margaret did was send cease and desist letters to each of them, informing them that they had no legal right to the property and that any attempts to change locks, remove belongings, or take any action regarding the estate would result in criminal charges for trespassing and theft. The second thing she did was schedule a formal reading of the will for the following week, requiring the attendance of all parties involved. But the third thing, the thing I suggested, was the most important. I went back to the house. Monica answered the door, her expression shifting from surprise to irritation in a heartbeat. What are you doing here? You're supposed to be packing. I unpacked, I said calmly. I stayed in a hotel, but I realized I forgot something important. Well, make it quick. We're having the house appraised tomorrow. I smiled. Are you? That's interesting, considering you don't own it. Her face went red. Don't start this again, Sarah. We've been patient with you. But what? You'll throw me out of my own house? Call the police on the legal owner? Please do. I'd love to see how that conversation goes. Richard appeared behind Monica. What's going on? Your sister-in-law is delusional, Monica said. She still thinks she has some claim here. Not some claim, I corrected. Full ownership. The house is in my name. Joint ownership as of 8 months ago, which means it automatically transferred to me upon Thomas's death. No probate, no trust, no contest. I watched the color drain from both their faces. That's impossible, Richard said. Thomas would never. Thomas loved me, I interrupted. And unlike you, he trusted me. He spent months restructuring his entire estate to make sure I'd be taken care of. Did you really think I wouldn't have my own lawyer? That I wouldn't check? David appeared from the living room, and behind him, I could see Jessica. They'd all been here, in my house, probably going through Thomas's things, making plans for what they'd sell and what they'd keep. This is ridiculous, David said. I was Thomas's business partner. I know what the structure was. Was being the operative word, I said. Check your partnership agreement, David. Or better yet, wait for the formal reading of the will next week. You're all invited, required to attend, actually. My lawyer insists. You're bluffing, Monica said, but her voice wavered. I pulled out my phone and showed her a photo of the revised will, complete with Thomas's signature and the witness signatures of his lawyer and notary. Next Tuesday, I said. 10 a.m. at Margaret Chen's office downtown. Be there, or be in violation of the estate settlement requirements. And Monica, you have until tomorrow morning to remove yourself and everyone else from this property. After that, I'll have the locks changed and anyone still inside will be arrested for trespassing. I turned to leave, then paused at the door. Oh, and one more thing. That champagne you were drinking yesterday, that was from Thomas's and my 10th anniversary. He'd been saving it for our 20th. I hope you enjoyed it. The week before the will reading was the longest of my life. I moved back into the house, but it felt different now. Tainted by their presence, by their greed, by their casual cruelty. I walked through rooms where we'd been happy and saw them with new eyes. The kitchen where Monica had claimed I'd wasted Thomas's money on redecorating. I'd paid for those renovations with money from my own mother's life insurance policy. Every penny, the office where David had probably been going through business files. Thomas had trusted him, but I'd noticed irregularities in the books months ago. Small ones, easy to miss unless you were looking. I had mentioned it to Thomas, but he dismissed my concerns. David's family, he'd said, he'd never steal from family. But I'd kept copies of those files anyway. Just in case. As I dug deeper into Thomas's papers, with Margaret's help, a pattern began to emerge. The family trust that Monica had mentioned, it existed, but it was nearly empty. Thomas had been systematically removing assets from it for years, long before he'd met me. Why? I found the answer in a box of old letters in the attic. Letters from Thomas's father to Thomas, written years before the old man died. Letters that detailed how Monica and Richard had been pressuring him to restructure the family business, to give them more control, to push Thomas out. Thomas had fought back by creating his own business, separate from the family. He'd built something that was entirely his own, and then he'd shared it with me. The family hadn't been trying to protect Thomas's legacy. They'd been trying to steal what they thought should have been theirs in the first place. Tuesday morning arrived with gray skies and cold rain. I dressed carefully in a black suit Thomas had always loved, pulled my hair back, and applied minimal makeup. I wanted to look composed, professional, unbreakable. Margaret's office was in a high-rise downtown, all glass and steel and expensive furniture. The conference room where we gathered had a view of the city that probably cost more per square foot than most people's homes. They were all there when I arrived. Monica and Richard sitting together on one side of the table. David, alone, looking nervous. Jessica, my cousin, who wouldn't meet my eyes. And to other people I didn't recognize. A young woman in a business suit and an older man with gray hair and kind eyes. Margaret entered last, carrying a thick folder of documents. She set them on the table with a decisive thump that made Monica jump. "Thank you all for coming," Margaret said. "We're here for the formal reading of Thomas Barrett's last will and testament, revised and executed 6 months before his death. Before we begin, I need to introduce 2 additional parties. This is Amanda Price from the District Attorney's Office, and this is Robert Chen, a forensic accountant." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Why is the DA here?" Richard demanded. "Because certain irregularities have come to light during the estate settlement process," Margaret said calmly. "But we'll get to that. First, the will." She read it aloud, every word. Thomas's love for me laid bare in legal language. His desire to protect me. His explicit instructions that I inherit everything, with no restrictions, no conditions, no trust to navigate, to my sister Monica. I leave the sum of $10,000 in recognition of the fact that we share blood, but not values. To my business partner David, I leave the sum of $25,000 and the option to buy out his minority stake in the company at fair market value. To my cousin-in-law Jessica, I leave nothing, as she has already taken enough. That last line made Jessica gasp. She looked stricken when Margaret finished reading. Monica stood up so fast her chair fell backwards. This is garbage, she spat. Thomas was manipulated. Sarah poisoned him against his own family. We'll contest this. On what grounds? Margaret asked. Thomas was of sound mind. The will was witnessed by 3 separate parties, including a doctor who certified his mental competency. The changes were made over a period of months with multiple consultations. You have no case. We'll find one, Monica said. We'll tie this up in court for years if we have to. That would be unwise, Amanda Price said, speaking for the first time. She had a quiet voice, but it cut through the room like a knife, especially given what Mr. Chen has discovered. All eyes turned to the forensic accountant. Over the past 3 years, Robert Chen said, reading from his notes, approximately $473,000 has been systematically embezzled from Thomas Barrett's company. The money was taken in small increments, designed to be overlooked during routine audits. It was funneled through a series of shell companies and eventually deposited into offshore accounts. David's face went white. The embezzlement was sophisticated, Chen continued, but not sophisticated enough. The trail leads directly to one David Morrison, business partner and CFO of Barrett Industries. That's insane, David said, but his voice cracked. I would never. We have the bank records, Amanda Price said. We have the shell company registrations, all filed with your signature. We have emails from your personal account to the accountants handling the offshore transfers. Mr. Morrison, you're going to be arrested when you leave this building. I'm here as a courtesy to inform you of that fact. David looked around the room wildly, as if searching for an escape route. Then he did something I didn't expect. He looked at Monica. You said it would work, he said, his voice desperate. You said if we took enough, we could force him to sell. You said, shut up, Monica hissed. But it was too late. Mrs. Lawson, Amanda Price said, turning to Monica, are you admitting to conspiracy to commit embezzlement and fraud? The room erupted. Richard started shouting about lawyers. Jessica burst into tears. David buried his face in his hands. And Monica, proud, cold Monica, just sat there with her mouth open, realizing she'd been caught. I watched it all from my seat at the head of the table, next to Margaret, and I felt nothing but a cold, deep satisfaction. The embezzlement began 4 years ago, Robert Chen said, his calm voice cutting through the chaos. Approximately 6 months after Sarah and Thomas married, text messages between Monica Lawson and David Morrison recovered from Morrison's phone explicitly discussed using financial pressure to drive Thomas to divorce Sarah, whom they referred to as the gold digger. He slid printed copies of text messages across the table. I picked one up and read Monica's words. If we bleed the company dry enough, Tommy will have to choose between his business and his wife. He'll pick the business. He always does. Another text from David. The offshore accounts are secure. By this time next year, we can force a buyout. And another from Monica. Once she's gone, we can restructure everything the way it should have been, the way Dad wanted it before Tommy got selfish. They'd been trying to destroy my marriage. They'd been stealing from Thomas, from the company he'd built from nothing, all to drive a wedge between us. And when that didn't work, when Thomas and I only grew closer as he struggled to understand why his business was suffering, they'd waited. They'd waited for him to die. The car accident, I said suddenly, my voice cutting through the noise. Everyone went silent. The night Thomas died, his brakes failed. The police report said it looked like brake line deterioration, but the car was only 2 years old. I looked at David, then at Monica. Did you? I asked. Did you kill him? No, David said immediately, his eyes wide. No. God, no. The accident was real. We had nothing to do with that. Amanda Price consulted her notes. We've re-examined the accident investigation. There's no evidence of foul play. The brake lines failed due to a manufacturing defect. There's actually a recall on that model now. I felt a strange mixture of relief and disappointment. They were thieves and manipulators, but at least they weren't murderers. However, Price continued. In the weeks following Thomas Barrett's death, there were multiple attempts to access his accounts, forge documents, and file fraudulent claims against the estate. Security footage from the house shows Monica Lawson and Richard Lawson removing items from the property without authorization. We were family. Monica said weakly. We had every right. You had no rights, I said, standing up. My hands were shaking, but my voice was steady. You never did. Thomas saw what you were. That's why he removed you from the trust. That's why he left you almost nothing. He knew you were stealing from him. I told him about the irregularities in the books, and he hired a private forensic accountant to investigate. The report came in a week before he died. I nodded to Margaret, who slid another document across the table. Thomas's notes in his own handwriting, documenting his plans to confront David and file charges. He was going to turn you in, I said to David. Both of you. He was just waiting until he had every piece of evidence lined up perfectly. And then he died. Margaret added, and you thought you could use Sarah's grief to cover your tracks. You thought you could push her out, take control of the estate, and bury the evidence of your theft. Instead, Amanda Price said, you're both facing charges of embezzlement, fraud, conspiracy, and attempted theft. Mr. Morrison, you're looking at 15 to 20 years. Mrs. Lawson, as an accomplice and conspirator, you're facing 10 to 15. Richard stood up, his face purple with rage. You can't do this. We have rights. We have lawyers. Then call them, I said. Call the best lawyers money can buy. Use every penny you stole from my husband to defend yourselves. It won't matter. Thomas documented everything. He was meticulous that way. One of the things I loved about him. I turned to Jessica, who was still crying silently in her chair. And you, I said, what was your role in all of this? Jessica looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. I didn't know, she whispered. I swear, Sarah. Monica told me you were trying to cut the family out. She said you'd manipulated Thomas, that you were going to take everything. I believed her. I'm so sorry. I studied my cousin, the girl I'd grown up with, who'd been my maid of honor at my wedding. I wanted to believe her. Part of me still loved her. But another part of me remembered her standing in my foyer, calling me a gold digger. Sorry isn't enough, I said. You chose to believe the worst of me without even asking my side. You chose to believe I was capable of manipulation and theft, but not that your precious Monica might be lying. That's on you, Jessica. She flinched like I'd hit her. However, I continued. You're also not mentioned in the DA's investigation, so you're free to go. But if you ever contact me again, if you ever try to reach out or apologize or explain, I'll have my lawyers send you a cease and desist. We're done. Jessica stood on shaking legs and left the room without another word. The rest of the meeting was a blur of legal proceedings. Monica and David were formally informed of the charges against them. They were read their rights. Security was called to escort them from the building, where police were waiting. Richard, who had apparently been unaware of his wife's criminal activities, sat in shock as his world fell apart. When it was over, when the conference room was finally empty except for Margaret and me, I sank into a chair and let out a breath I felt like I'd been holding for months. How do you feel? Margaret asked, numb. I admitted. I thought I'd feel triumphant, vindicated, but mostly I just feel tired. That's normal, Margaret said gently. You've been through trauma, grief, betrayal, and now this. Give yourself time to process. What happens now? Now we finish settling the estate. The house is yours, free and clear. The business is yours, though I'd recommend hiring a new CFO immediately. David's embezzlement did damage the company's finances, but it's recoverable. You also have the option to sell if you don't want to run it yourself. I thought about that. Thomas's company, the thing he'd built from nothing, that he'd been so proud of. I want to save it, I said. Thomas would want that. Margaret smiled. Then we'll make it happen. The next 6 months were a whirlwind. I hired new management for the company, brought in consultants to repair the financial damage, and slowly rebuilt what Monica and David had tried to destroy. The offshore accounts were seized and the money returned. The DA's office worked quickly, and both Monica and David took plea deals rather than face trial. Monica got 8 years. David got 12. Richard filed for divorce and moved across the country. Unable to face the shame of what his wife had done, Jessica sent letters. I returned them unopened. The house slowly started to feel like home again. I repainted the kitchen one more time, a shade of blue that made me happy. I planted new flowers in the garden. I adopted a dog, a golden retriever mix from the shelter, and named him Thomas. Not after my husband, exactly, but in honor of new beginnings. 1 year after that terrible day when Monica told me to get out, I stood in my kitchen making coffee and looking out at the garden, where my dog was playing in the morning sun. The house was quiet but not lonely, peaceful but not empty. My phone rang. It was Margaret. I have news, she said. The business turned a profit last quarter. A significant profit. Thomas would be proud. I smiled. He would be. Also, Monica's lawyer contacted me. She wants to apologize. She's asking if you'd be willing to accept a letter. I thought about that. About forgiveness and moving forward and what Thomas would want. No, I said. Some bridges, once burned, should stay burned. Understood. How are you doing, Sarah? Really? I looked around my kitchen, at the home I'd fought for, at the life I'd rebuilt from ashes. I'm doing well, I said. Better than well, actually. I'm happy. And I was. Not the carefree happiness of before, when I'd been naive enough to think family meant loyalty, but a deeper, harder-won happiness. The happiness of someone who'd been tested and survived. Who'd been betrayed and chose strength instead of bitterness. They'd told me to get out. They'd called me a gold digger, a manipulator, a parasite. They'd tried to take everything Thomas and I built together. But in the end, I'd exposed the truth. Not just that I owned it all, but that I'd earned it. Through 12 years of partnership. Through love and trust and the quiet work of building a life together. Through the careful documentation of a woman who'd learned from her mother's mistakes. Through the foresight to protect myself without ever expecting I'd need to use that protection. Against the people who were supposed to be family. The revenge wasn't in taking something from them. They'd done that to themselves through their own greed and betrayal. The revenge was in proving them wrong about who I was. I wasn't weak. I wasn't helpless. I wasn't someone who could be pushed aside and forgotten. I was Thomas's wife, his partner, his equal. And now, I was the one standing tall while they paid for their crimes. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about hurting the people who hurt you. It's about building something so strong, so true, so unshakably yours that their attempts to destroy it only reveal their own emptiness. I took my coffee out to the back porch and sat in the morning sun, watching my dog play. Somewhere across the city, Monica was in a prison cell, probably cursing my name. David was in a different facility, probably regretting every choice that led him there. Jessica was somewhere, living with the knowledge that she'd chosen wrong when it mattered most. And I was here, in my home, living my life, moving forward. They'd told me to get out. Instead, I'd stayed and won, not because I was cruel or vengeful, but because I was simply, finally, completely myself. And that, I realized, was the greatest victory of all. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt betrayed by the people who were supposed to have your back, leave a comment below. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself against impossible odds? How did it change you? Share your story. And if you want to hear more stories about justice, resilience, and the strength it takes to rebuild after betrayal, make sure to subscribe. Because everyone deserves to know that they're stronger than they think. And that sometimes, the best revenge is simply refusing to be broken.